Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of people on the job, at home, and in our communities. The Trump administration has repeatedly said it wants to deport as many people as possible. What that means for the estimated 8.3 million undocumented immigrants in the American workforce is unclear. As attacks on immigrants escalate, our two guests today are working on the front lines to save lives, defend rights, and they're helping to build a critical network of support for the most vulnerable amongst us. Murad Awawdeh is president and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition, the largest and oldest immigrant rights advocacy organization in the U.S. The NYIC is today facing overwhelming demand for its services, given mounting federal immigration enforcement and abrupt policy shifts. Seth Goodman Park is the supervising attorney for the Asylum Support Clinic, a faith-based organization that assists asylum seekers in the New York City area. Seth's work has impacted over 1,000 immigrants from over 25 countries. Murad, Seth, welcome to CityWorks. I am very glad to have you with me.
Nice to be here.
I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. Let's start just quickly with what it is that you do. What does your organization do? What is a support clinic?
So the Asylum Support Clinic is one of many clinics actually in New York that provides pro se representation.
Now, what does that mean, people?
I'll tell you. Pro se is actually, we empower them to represent themselves. One of the issues in immigration, I'm sure we'll discuss it, is the absence of enough attorneys to assist. And so we have plenty of people that need to file their asylum applications that just can't find representation. So we assist them in making sure they can take these first steps in satisfying the regulatory requirements and filing.
Important work. And what about you, Murad? How would you describe what the coalition does?
You know, the New York Immigration Coalition is, as you mentioned, the oldest and largest immigrant rights organization in the United States. We have over 200 members across the state of New York, from Buffalo down to Babylon to the East End, Long Island. We're an advocacy and policy organization that also does service coordination, working with our members and our partners to deliver, at times, really critical and life-saving services in community, everything from health to education to immigration legal services. So we're sort of our services and tend to be a one-stop shop for what families may need in New York to not only be able to survive, but put them on a pathway to thriving.
Now, people watching this are probably aware of some of the high-profile cases that have come about recently. Everything from Mahmoud Khalil, the student at Columbia, who was seized on the streets in a very dramatic fashion in front of his 8-month pregnant, I think, wife, to the mother with 3 kids in upstate New York who was seized recently in an ICE raid. What can you tell us about that kind of spectrum of people being affected in these roundups at this moment?
So what we're seeing is the Trump administration continuing. Literally every single day, there's at least 1 or 2 anti-immigrant policies that they're rolling out. The last more horrendous than the one that came before it. And this is all part and parcel to his mass deportation plan that he campaigned on. The targeting of students, specifically going after people who were protesting for justice in Palestine, has been horrendous. And what we've seen from that, not only was Mahmoud the first student who was targeted and attacked in front of his 8-month pregnant wife, who's due any day now at this point, and who's been incarcerated in Louisiana for over a month at this point. But we're seeing now over 300 other students who've had their visas revoked, and that the revocation of status is what we're also seeing with the Trump administration, where they're ending temporary protected status. They've ended the parole programs for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, going after the Unite for Ukraine program. And every status that you can think of is under attack right now. And I think that historically, status was a sort of protection for immigrants. And now what we're seeing is that those with status and those without status are being attacked. And that leads us to what happened over the past 2 weeks in North Country, specifically in Sackett's Harbor, where we had a family, 3 children and a mother, who were detained and disappeared by ICE. And after a heroic and Herculean effort to bring them back, we were successful in doing that this Monday. and bringing them back to their home. But that is just a small glimpse of what is happening in the moment that we're living in. And all of this is not about our safety or security, because it never was about that with this administration. It's about cruelty, and that is their point.
Now, there's the revocation of status, and then there's the people that are just trying to get status. Typically, asylum seekers have been in that latter category. Who are you working with? What kinds of clients?
We are getting people that are coming from countries where there are horrible situations, and they're seeking sanctuary in the United States, which the United States is obligated to provide, not just pursuant to our statutes, but we have international treaties that we must abide by. And so we assist them in making their case, telling their story, their narrative, as to why they themselves were being persecuted in their countries and why they're entitled to sanctuary in the United States as a result of that mistreatment.
Do you want to give us just an example?
We had a man a while back who was working for his country, I'll just say his country's police force, and refused to do something illegal in that police force, and he was targeted as by the police force for murder. Basically, we have a lot of people that stand up to gangs. We have a lot of people who are just part of protests in their countries and political rallies, and find themselves, for whatever reason, becoming the enemy of the people that are in power, and really need to come to the United States because it's the only place that provides them with safety.
Every single story is tragic, and most of us have an immigration story of one kind or another. I immigrated here, born in the UK, lived here, had an easy experience. We all need to, I think, remember the history of this country as we have this conversation.
Well, I was saying I was saying to you before that's kind of the clash. We're a nation of immigrants, and yet the politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, have made immigration a hot button issue and made immigrants the enemy, which is just a real, a dichotomy or a contradiction or something? Yeah. Absolutely.
And yet there does feel as if there is something very new right now, Murad, maybe not completely new, but with the seizures, there's also these efforts to gain access to databases, to turn over registries at shelters. I mean, where are you seeing, I don't want to say innovation sounds positive, but where are you seeing new challenges on this front?
Well, what we're seeing is the Trump administration really quickly heading to the authoritarian field of government, and really trying to erode our democracy as quickly as they can.
How so?
Not just with individual people's cases and the erosion of due process, but what we're also seeing is that there's data privacy protections that are in place between agencies. And just earlier this week, we saw the Trump administration announce an agreement between the IRS and the Department of Homeland Security to go after tax-paying immigrants. And that in itself, here in the state of New York, immigrants, undocumented and documented, contribute over $80 billion a year. So it's going to really give ICE even more information on where to target people. And, even this agreement between ICE and DHS and the IRS is really horrendous, because people were paying their taxes. They were contributing back to society. And what you see now is that the Trump administration is weaponizing their good faith efforts to integrate as best as they can and do what's asked of them, and to follow the tax code and tax law. And now they're going to use the information that people submitted in paying their taxes against them. So these are a couple of the things that we're seeing happen in real time. We're also seeing the Trump administration not really abiding by all the court orders that are happening right now. So that's another issue that we're seeing in this moment.
Now, that IRS decision was egregious enough to cause the head of the IRS to quit over it.
Yes, after they signed the agreement.
Yeah, well, good point. One of the things I want to come back to is what the implications are for safety, because you talked about the integration of people into our society and how difficult it is, but it's almost as if people are being driven out of the system if they can't pay their taxes, if they're scared of going to the police for any reason, if they're perhaps scared of taking their kids to school.
We have people that are afraid to apply for immigration benefits as a consequence. You're right. It's the opposite of helpful. It's actually defeating, and is creating an even larger underclass of undocumented workers. It's, as Murad explained, it's actually economically devastating to not allow taxpayers to pay their tax, or people, workers to pay their taxes. Economically, I'm not an economist, but it doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
And there's a gender aspect to it too. Presumably there ends up with being ever more vulnerability in the immigrant population if you don't dare call for help if you're being beaten, for example, or in an exploited situation.
Well, I do have a few members of the LGBTQ community. I also do some work with the Anti-Violence Project in New York, working with the LGBTQ community. People who are coming from countries where it's illegal to be gay, and now they're afraid to come to the United States, the country that they thought was going to be their beacon of safety.
And I am afraid also for women who might be at greater danger of trafficking, exploitation, or just domestic violence. Murad, what are you seeing out there on that front?
We've already seen women not reporting crimes that they've been victims of because of their status. There was a woman in Western New York who was being domestically abused, and when the neighbor finally called the police, her abuser told the police she's the person you need to take, and she is also undocumented. And then she ended up in ICE detention, right? Like, that is the piece that we're seeing here, which is why we're also fighting for policies like New York for All at the state level, which would prohibit the collusion of local authorities to work with and collude with immigration enforcement without an actual judicial warrant, because we know that that is not their role, and we should be using our state resources to separate our families, harm our communities, and gut our local economies.
I thought that collusion was already stopped in New York.
It's not. It's in New York City, but we're also seeing Mayor Eric Adams just signing an agreement and an executive order with ICE to bring them back to Rikers. And if you watch the news from today, you would have heard his first deputy mayor, Randy Maestro, say that there was no, red lines for what ICE can do, and that they're going after violent people. And what we've seen is that that's not who they're going after. And what we've also seen is ICE abuse their authority. And at the same time, for those who don't remember or don't know, Rikers Island is not a jail where people are being imprisoned for their convictions most of the time. Those are people who are being held there while they wait for their day in court. They are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So I think in this moment, what we're seeing is a lot of different ways in which the city is turning its back on its immigrant population, but also on our local laws.
For people that aren't entirely up to speed on that, just remind folks what the proposal is for the use of Rikers as a place for detention.
So the city has signed an executive order that would allow ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Homeland Security Investigations and a slew of other agencies, to operate outside and inside of Rikers Island, but to conduct what they're saying is not civil immigration, but is civil immigration. They're trying to use wordplay here to say that they're not violating local law. And what we do know is that whenever you let ICE into the space, there's no stopping them from actually going after people who are not targets, right? Like that family in Sackett's Harbor. They actually weren't the target that they were looking for. They arrested the target. Then they went door to door on the farm looking for other people, and unfortunately found 3 children and their mother still sleeping. And instead of getting ready to go to school that day in the early morning, they were woken up, arrested, handcuffed, a 9-year-old handcuffed, and thrown into a van, put in detention, and then disappeared to Texas.
One of the things that I'm struck by is what Murad is saying about the erosion of rights generally. We're seeing an erosion of that New York City law. We're seeing an erosion of our democracy. We're seeing all sorts of impacts, not just on the immigrants themselves, but on all of us. So when we come back from the break, let's pick up there and talk about not just what might be going on a sort of more macro level, but what can be done and what sort of strategies are actually working. We're going to take a short break. You're watching CityWorks. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking about the Trump administration's assault on immigrant communities and asylum seekers with Murad Awawdeh of the New York Immigration Coalition and Seth Goodman Park of the Asylum Support Clinic right here in New York City. I promised that when we come back, we would talk about impacts. So first, let's talk about impacts on the actual people that we're talking about. What happens to the folks you're working with while they're waiting, and how are they responding to the climate in which we're in right now?
Right. So as a practitioner who deals with people who are involved in these cases, I was not going to use a legal term, but I will. It has a chilling effect.
You betcha.
Just this week, I had a client ask me if he should quit his job. And I said, why would you do that? And he said, because he heard that the immigration benefits program that he was under was going to be canceled. Well, first of all, it's a rumor. Right. And second of all, let's leave that to the employer. But it's actually the effect, I think, Murad can speak to this on a more general policy level, but I think it's the impact that the administration wishes for it to have. We also, unfortunately, we have sometimes participants that are afraid to come to the clinic. We've had to institute a new policy regarding who watches the front door because, and it's mostly optics, but it's to provide some comfort to our participants who are coming literally to a sanctuary right. to apply for asylum.
And you've written, Murad, about the impact on the economy, not small.
No, it's going to be devastating. Just here in the state of New York alone, undocumented immigrants contribute over $6.7 billion. Immigrants of various statuses contribute over $74.8 billion. This is incredibly for the economy and the well-being of New York. Immigrants continue to be the economic backbone of our state. So this is actually really going to have a much bigger impact than people understand. And there was a report that came out earlier this year that showed that just nationally across the board, the U.S. will lose over $2 trillion in GDP just for the mass deportation plan if it were to be successful. So I think in this moment, what we have to be asking ourselves is, on election day in 2024, the number one issue that every single voter who was interviewed across this nation said that their top issue was affordability and economy. How is this administration actually addressing that? They're not. They're actually making things worse. Immigrants actually make things more affordable. They are the people who are, planting, picking, distributing our foods on our farms. They're the ones who are our healthcare workers. They are the ones who are building our homes. In every industry, immigrants continue to be the backbone of. And the Trump administration is doing everything in their power to limit that workforce and remove people to deliver on a campaign pledge to just have his mass deportation plan implemented, which is going to be economically devastating for this country, but economically devastating for all communities across our state.
Are there some people making money? I mean, we know that the Trump administration has said they have a quota for detentions. Is there money being made by the private detention centers? That perhaps...
Absolutely. They're going to be making the most money out of anyone in the industries in this moment. What we're seeing is, even without a budget resolution at the federal level, the Trump administration has already put out a $45 billion RFP, procurement RFP, to actually build more detention facilities. So, the core civics of the world and the geo groups are the ones who run the largest private detention facilities. And are going to be reaping even more money in this moment. So we have to continuously be asking ourselves, how is this good for any of us? And it's not. It's not good for us individually. It's not good for our communities. It's not good for our country. And it just seems like we continue to go down this weird path where we know at the end of it is going to be doomsday for many people.
I mean, I wish there was like a silver bullet fix to all this, but right. I don't think there is, right, Murad? But there are some legislative proposals that people could get behind.
Yeah, at the federal level, we have the Dream and Promise Act that has been reintroduced, which would provide people who are dreamers who came at a young age to this country, as well as essential workers and TPS recipients, to actually have a pathway to legalization. At the state level, we're pushing for, in the state budget, which has not been passed, it's about 9 days late in this moment, we're pushing for $165 million for immigration legal services. What we know is that people who have an immigration attorney have a 10 times chance of winning their case than those who don't. And the state has already invested in this program, but we need to go further as we see that attacks continue to be waged on our communities. And then also making sure that we actually pass the New York for All Act, which would prohibit the collusion of any state agency in working with ICE enforcement, immigration enforcement without a judicial warrant. We have to protect our communities, and at the same time, the protection comes twofold at the state level. One, by providing the attorney to support the families, and then the second is to make sure that we're not putting more people into the ringer of having to get detained using state resources, because that's not what we're paying our state taxes for. It's to ensure that we're, building our roads, maintaining our schools, and making sure that people who need the safety net are getting the safety net of the state.
One of the things that this all comes down to is people's engagement with this issue. And the clinic that you work with, you mentioned the volunteer staff there, the people that are there. Are you seeing an increased amount of attention and interest in collaborating with you?
We've had over 150 volunteers come through, either as interpreters, document drafters, or volunteer attorneys to assist.
And is that unusual numbers?
It's heightened it's increased over time. I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have a participation issue, because not as many immigrants are arriving in the country seeking asylum. But yes, our particular clinic's attention grows, and some other work that my temple is doing through Refugee Employment Project, which is on the other end of not the other end of the spectrum, but assists refugees in getting jobs. Attitudinally, people are more focused on what they can do to help. Yeah.
And what are you seeing, Murad, in terms of what people can do effectively? You told the story from Sackett's Harbor, which was actually a kind of heartening one.
Yeah, absolutely. Sackett's Harbor is actually pretty interesting. It's a town of 1,300 residents. It just so happens that border czar and deportation czar Tom Holman lives there. And of the 1,300 residents, about 1,000 people rallied for the release of this family that was taken by ICE. And the local community was incredible. Their teachers, their principal, the entire school community really rallied for these students to have them released. And in this moment, what we're seeing is that everyone's taking action in one way or another. And an easy way that people can take action is by texting NYIC to the number 52886. Again, the number is 52886, and you're just going to text NYIC to it, and you'll be looped into all of the actions and campaigns that we're running right now at the local, state, and federal level to protect and defend our communities. Every day we're seeing more attacks, and every day we need more people to step up to fight back, because without that fight back, they're anticipating us and just being scared and quiet, and we have to step up in our power to make sure that we actually uphold the values that we all have come to love and want to ensure continue in this country, because we're moving very quickly from a democracy to an authoritarian regime here.
Is there a role specifically for trade unions and union members to play? Because the trade union movement's had a kind of complex up and down history in relation to immigration, but at the present has supposedly a fairly progressive position, at least at the level of the AFL-CIO.
Absolutely. I think labor unions, trade unions, everyone needs to step up in this moment. A lot of immigrants are part of the trades, and they are at risk of losing their status in this moment, which means that we're going to have less workers being able to work, and then workers who are in status being detained and then disappeared, right? So this is an opportunity for everyone to stand united to fight back against these horrible situations that we're seeing happen across our city, our state, and our country. We're seeing people being snatched by masked men on streets in broad daylight and then disappeared. This is not the United States that I grew up. This is not the United States that my family emigrated to for opportunity and to be able to live somewhere that is safe. This is very reminiscent of dictatorships across the country, across the world.
And we know that these behaviors, these don't just stop with one group. Once you see a vulnerable group treated one way, it spreads.
Murad's giving a plug. Can I just
go ahead? And I was wanting you to mention those nice red cards.
Those are wonderful, and actually we use those in our organization. But just the organization that the two that I'm affiliated with, that people want to look into them, is one is the Asylum Support Clinic at Rutgers Presbyterian Church on the Upper West Side, and the other is the Refugee Employment Project at Temple B'nai Jeshurun, also on the Upper West Side.
And those red cards?
Red cards. Murad's organization produces them. We just distribute them to our participants.
We have a slew of Know Your Rights material on our website. People can visit nyic.org/KYR. Again, that's nyic.org/KYR. It's critically important that people know what their rights are. And I'm not just talking about immigrants. I'm talking about those without status, those with status, and U.S. citizens to know what their rights are when they're confronted by law enforcement. And what we're seeing is that when people know their rights, they are more empowered to actually fight in the moment to make sure that they are not doing anything that's going to put themselves or their family or their neighbors in harm's way. And what you're referring to are what are called our Know Your Rights cards. We have them translated on our website in over 19 languages that are commonly spoken across the state of New York. And they pretty much give you a step-by-step guide of what to do. You have the right to remain silent. You also, if you are home and someone knocks on your door and they say that they're ICE, if they don't have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, and you can find what a judicial warrant looks like on our website, you don't have to open up the door. And we have other things, part of Know Your Rights, that are really important, like never lie, never run. Those just don't lead to good outcomes for the individual. So for folks who are interested in knowing what their rights are, please visit our website, nyic.org/KYR. You can also print the cards and then distribute them yourself. We've given out probably hundreds of thousands of them at this point in a very short period of time across the state of New York.
Thank you so much, Murad Awawdeh and Seth Goodman Park. Wonderful speaking with you. And thank you for all the information at your site. That's it for CityWorks. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. And be sure to download the CUNY TV app, where you can watch this show and all of CUNY TV's programming. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.